You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you from Boao here for the Boao Forum on Asia. Earlier, we had our policymakers talking about the policies regarding international issues as well as financial sectors. Now let's listen in to an earlier conversation I had with two scholars about China's openness and innovation.
When world leaders and great minds gather, it's time to ponder and chart the course. Amid the chill of global changes, see the spring of openness and the blossoming of innovation. World Insight's host Tian Wei brings you fresh views and meaningful talks on site. Tune in to World Insight for its special coverage on the Boao Forum for Asia Annual Conference 2018.
Now I'm joined in the special program by Nicholas Lardy, Senior Fellow with the Peterson Institute coming from the U.S. Welcome, Mr. Lardy.
Thank you.
And also Mr. Yang Xiyu, Senior Fellow with the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome as well, Mr. Yang.
Thank you.
We are here in Boao. This is about openness. This is about innovation, this year's Boao Forum. And important political speeches have been made about these points. The question is, what about the next? This year, China, 40 years of reform and opening up. This is a big moment. Will the country and will the rest of the world be able to rally about this idea about further reform? Mr. Lardy, your observation.
Well, I think President Xi has been very clear, starting at his speech at Davos 2 years ago, that China is very committed to continuing to open up and reform domestically, internationally, and I think that's been very well received in the rest of Asia. And the United States looks like a bit of an outlier at this point in terms of pulling back from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, saying negative things about the WTO, and this very strong America First agenda of President Trump.
People have been talking about every country these days needs their own version, like China's reform and opening up, because they have their own problems when it comes to economy and also politics. And Mr. Lardy, do you think that the United States also needs something like that? Similar remedy or different, but certainly interesting in nature?
No, I agree with you. I think China does serve as a model. The opening up of China over the last 40 years has been a major contributor to China's economic success. The United States is relatively open already, but the risk is we're closing down. We're putting on more restrictions on inbound investment. Maybe we're going to put more restrictions on imports. So I do think we need to recalibrate our relationship with the global economy to be more open, engage in more trade liberalization, and continue to be a very open investment environment.
How is China going to recalibrate, if I could use that verb as well, the momentum of reform and pushing the whole country really in the one direction?
Well, we are going to the reform from the touch the stone, step by step, going to the reform guided by the comprehensive design and the plan, strategic plan. That is the totally, that is the substantive difference between the reform 1.0 to reform 2.0.
Bilateral trade issues between China and the United States. What is your latest assessment of where we are going?
Well, I think it's very difficult to assess because we see some tactics on both sides, but the bottom line, particularly for the United States, has not yet been clarified. So it's hard to judge exactly where we're going.
Yeah, earlier we heard from the Chinese president, and we also read some latest tweets coming from U.S. President Donald Trump. If it is something that you can trust, I mean the tweet, what would you say?
Well, I think that President Trump tweets about a lot of things. Sometimes he changes his mind. Sometimes he forgets what he said before. So it may be more tactics than strategy.
Not necessarily a reliable source when it comes to the results.
Sometimes it is, and a few times it isn't.
Here's the thing, Mr. Lardy. The U.S. is not only facing a so-called trade surplus issue with China, but also with Germany and some of the other economies. So the question is, at this stage of development, the U.S. probably has to choose that road. There's no other options.
Well, you're absolutely right. The U.S. has been running a global deficit for a long time. We have a shortfall of savings relative to investment, so we have to borrow from the rest of the world. And to borrow from the rest of the world, they have to sell more to us than we buy from them. And so if you really want to get at this issue, you have to deal with the underlying saving investment imbalance in the United States. It can't be addressed by trying to reconfigure a bilateral trade relationship.
So how sophisticated do you think the politics will get regarding this issue leading up to the midterm election, Mr. Lardy?
Well, I think there are a lot of people in the administration that don't really understand that the underlying problem is not trade protectionism in China or any other country. It's a problem that's really domestic within our own economy, and if we want to address it, we need to do something about our domestic low level of savings. This is a very complicated thing, though, to explain to the American electorate, and a lot of politicians want to campaign just on pointing fingers at other countries.
You have seen the team that President Trump has been building recently over the past few weeks. You see TV personalities being incorporated as the economic advisor, and also policies back in the 1970s, last century, being exercised, for example, using tariffs in a trade dispute. So will these tactics and the means really get the United States to where it wants to be, Mr. Lardy?
I don't think tariffs is the right approach to where we want to go.
The good news is China has determined to take a much bolder opening up policy. That will be helpful to rebalance the U.S.-China, not only U.S.-China, but China, India, many other countries balance trade. But on the other hand, I think through the disputes, not war, through disputes, the U.S. and China relation will get more matured than before. Both of the capitals will be wiser than before to deal with, sophisticated, sensitive issues.
Let's deal with some of the key words you just mentioned, Mr. Yang. One is about the bilateral relations getting more matured. That is the word you've just been using. So many wonder, Mr. Yang, whether this so-called trade war, will it be only the starting point of further interest conflict between China and the United States that is so obvious to the rest of the world, and it will be presented on the surface to the rest of the world? Mr. Yang.
Well, let me put it back this way. I use the term mature because President Trump, President Xi Jinping are very smart. They have a political wisdom. They know exactly which route is a benefit for his and his country. On South China Sea issue, the disputes remain very sharp. So the picture is very mixed. So some part is good, some part is bad. What we need to do is just enlarge and expand the good part, and to
find a common ground in a way.
To buy common ground, and limit the bad part. That is the task for both of the leaders.
Can they do that, Mr. Lardy?
Well, I certainly think there's an opportunity in this window of negotiation that I just mentioned. We'll have to see whether both sides can take advantage of it to reach a satisfactory solution.
If you look at Steve Bannon, who used to serve in the administration, the articles he wrote and also the speeches he's given about the U.S. stance strategically toward China, obviously you don't see a positive picture as Mr. Yang just described. So, Mr. Lardy, what is your judgment here? Is this only the beginning of something much more serious, fight, obvious to the rest of the world, or this is going to be a small experiment between the two to see how they can tangle with better steps?
Well, I hope it's going to turn out to be a small experiment, but we'll have to wait and see.
The hope is one thing, the reality is another thing, Mr. Lardy.
But remember, as we're talking about a trade war, it hasn't really started yet.
Not yet.
The big tariffs that President Trump has proposed won't go into effect until June at the earliest, and it may be significantly after that. So there's a significant window of opportunity for the two sides to have a discussion, negotiation, and lead to a favorable outcome that would maybe put the relationship on a more stable basis.
That is only about the two sides, but also inside the United States. In your society, there are a lot of interest groups, of course, agricultural business, the car industry, the planes. And how much do you think they will have their input into the overall discussion? Will they, in a way, or in any way, shape the conversation?
Oh, I think they're already shaping the conversation, and what we're seeing is a lot of pushback against the tariff approach that the president has proposed. And it's the agricultural groups, almost all the manufacturing groups are all pointing out that there's a big downside to what has been proposed by the administration. I think there's a lot of pushback that the administration is already feeling, and it will get much worse over the next several weeks as various industries and groups have an opportunity to make a case that their products should not be on the tariff list.
For now, I want to thank the two of you, Nicholas Lardy, Yang Xiyu. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. All the best. That is my earlier conversation with two scholars coming from China and the United States regarding the geopolitical issue as well as many of the trade and economic issues going on between the two countries. And with that, we are wrapping up this special edition of our program from Boao on World Insight. In fact, this is the last edition of our special program from Boao. On behalf of my team here in Boao and in Beijing, I'm bidding you goodbye. If you want to find us, try to find us on YouTube and also social platforms, Facebook, Twitter, as well as Sina Weibo. I'm Tian Wei. See you next time from Beijing.